So this is our official welcome to everybody. This is our first of several virtual events in celebration of National Aphasia Awareness Month. And I'm going to introduce myself first. I am Dr. Leora Cherney, and I am the director of our Center for Aphasia Research and Treatment. And we founded our center quite a long time ago, back in 2001. And this is our 18th year that we are celebrating our Aphasia Awareness Month. I do want to welcome our speaker, Dr. Katie Strong, and we'll go to our second slide here. Dr. Strong is a faculty member. She's a researcher, and she's a speech-language pathologist at Central Michigan University. She's been working with and for people impacted by aphasia for a long time, for over 25 years. Dr. Strong teaches and mentors students about aphasia, but she's involved in many other aphasia-related activities, and she's a really very busy person. Just to give you some examples, she's a founding member of the Lansing Area Aphasia Support Group. I think we may have a few people from that support group here tonight.
Do I see Rebecca? Yep.
Yeah. And Dr. Strong is active in one of our professional organizations that's called Aphasia Access. And she's a host of a series of podcast conversations that are related to aphasia. And Dr. Strong is also involved in something that's called Project Bridge, which aims to make research more relevant to people with aphasia by including people with aphasia and family members, not just as research subjects or research participants, but as partners and collaborators who will help initiate and develop new research ideas about aphasia. And Dr. Strong has received awards for her research and her aphasia-related activities. And these include one very prestigious one that was awarded from England, and it's called the Tavistock Trust for Aphasia Distinguished Scholars. Dr. Strong has many journal publications about her research, but today she's going to talk specifically about her work on stories. So I don't want to say anything more. I will turn it over to Dr. Strong so that she can have as much time as she needs to be able to tell us about this fascinating work that she's been doing and how important it is to all of us. And then just a quick reminder, keep your mics muted until Dr. Strong invites us to take part in sections related to questions. And if you do have a question and would like to put it in the chat, you could do that as well. Dr. Strong, it is all yours. Thank you for agreeing to present.
Oh, it's my thank you, Dr. Cherney, all of the crew in Chicago. It's just fabulous to be here celebrating Aphasia Month with Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, and so many familiar names and faces on Zoom, as well as lots of new friends and to meet as well. Dr. Cherney did a fabulous job introducing me, so I don't need to talk anymore about myself, but I would like to start off this talk telling you about how I got interested in stories and how I saw the power of story in helping someone who had very severe aphasia move forward in their life, in their ability to express themselves, and also in just feeling more comfortable with who they were as a person. So we're looking at a photo from a while ago when I had quite a bit shorter hair and probably a little bit less weight on me. On the left-hand side of the screen is my colleague, Chris Schneider. And in the middle is my friend and collaborator, Nikki Booth. And then I'm on the right with the glasses, the darker glasses. Nikki had a severe stroke and came to our rehab unit with global aphasia and much depression and very angry and had much difficulty expressing herself, engaging in rehab tasks. And Chris took some time to be able to help her explore herself through, they expressed themselves through painting and drawing. And Nikki's art is beautiful. But what I saw happen through the art is that Nikki started sharing her art and talking about herself. And it turned into this story that was Nikki's story, but Chris, her speech pathologist, collaborated with her so that Nikki was able to explore how her past and her current self really could evolve into a future where her aphasia was not as big and in the way of her life. And so I dedicate this talk and really all of my story work to Chris and Nikki, who heartbreakingly are not with us on earth anymore, but I know they're smiling down on us tonight and are proud of the work that I'm doing and all of the interest that everyone is that has in storytelling in aphasia. So where we're headed today is I thought maybe we could just break this down into 5 different questions. And what we can do is at each question will take us a section, and then before we get into the next question, we can stop and have a discussion and any thoughts or comments or questions, and then we can move on. So I'll give you a heads up as to when those questions, when it's a good time for discussion. And I should also say this, that tomorrow the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab will email out all of the slides and all of the links so that you can have all of this information at your fingertips. So, feel free if you want to take a photo or something, that's fine, but we'll send out all of the information and you'll have it there for you. Also, I see that someone had asked for a link to the podcasts, and we can add that to the handout. I don't have that, but we can certainly add that to the handout and share that with you as well. So. All right, so what are we going to explore today? Question 1, why do stories matter? Question 2, how does aphasia impact story? Question 3, how can stories help me move forward? Question 5, where do I start? I'm having trouble counting today. Question 4, where do I start with my story? And question 5, what could I do with my story? Or where could I take my story? Or maybe even where could my story take me? So let's go ahead and start with this, why do stories matter? I love this quote from Christina Baldwin. Words are how we think. Stories are how we link. So stories are really something that we use to help make meaning out of things. When something happens to us during the day, we usually want to tell a story about, well, you won't believe what happened to me, right? When big life events happen to us, health events like having a stroke or a brain tumor or head injury, stories can help us make meaning out of those events. They also can help us connect what happened in the past to what's happening currently, to also what might happen in the future. Now, stories are really an important part of being a human. They make us able to connect with others, right? Relationships are built on sharing stories. And the type of relationship that you have with someone may depend on what kind of story you tell with them. And so this stories don't happen in a vacuum. We might tell ourselves stories, or that we have stories that we tell, but they're influenced by those around us, and they help to connect, or maybe might actually make a relationship a little challenging at times. And then this idea of story contributing to a healthier view of ourselves, or what we might call identity, how we view ourselves and how we talk to ourselves, and the stories that we tell to ourselves, and the stories that we share about ourselves to others influences how we view ourselves. And that story can, depending on the stories that you tell, it may influence how confident or how uncomfortable or how much grief or how much excitement you have about who you are. So there's 3 important concepts that I'd like for you to think about that are integral ingredients to storytelling. The first one is this idea of identity. We were just talking about it, right? This, who am I? Identity can change over time. Identity can shift in one environment to another. I have an identity as a faculty member with my students. I have an identity as a daughter with my parents. I have a different identity in maybe a social group that I'm in, so we all have different kind of identities, and they can integrate or they can be separate from one another. But this idea of who we are, and some people believe, I think I might be one of them, but that we are the stories that we tell. Now that's big stuff to think about, right? We are the story. It's kind of that you are what you eat, right? Or we are the stories that we tell. And so that means that stories have some power in how we choose to tell them. And so the next concept is story. Okay, so we have to have a story if we're talking about storytelling, right? So this story or narrative is another term that you might hear people use. I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. I don't know if we have any linguists or English teachers or folks that are, have a different discipline than me. They may argue that they are different, but for our terms tonight, we're going to use those interchangeably. And I typically like to just use story because it seems like it's accessible to all of us. So we're going to talk more about story in the next couple of slides, but this idea that how we choose, the language we choose to use to share stories, how we frame something that happened to us. Is it something that was positive, or was it negative, or was it funny, or is it painful? Those sorts of things all have influence. And then this last concept of storytelling, or a technical term, social co-construction. Fancy word, but what it means is that the audience matters. You always are telling a story to an audience, even if you're writing it to yourself, or you're telling it to yourself. And so how you tell a story depends on who you're telling it to. Right? Back to those different identities that I have, I might tell a story in a very different way to my students than I might to my friends after work, or I might choose to not even share a certain story with my mom versus my brother. And so this idea that stories don't happen in a vacuum, they rely on social constructs. And so they're kind of what we would call co-constructed or co-created with whoever it is that you're interacting with in that environment. And that's so powerful that sometimes I'm guessing maybe all of us have had this experience that we told a story and we got a reaction from someone that we weren't expecting. And it shut us down. And we chose to not tell that story again, or we didn't tell that story with that person, or we really changed how we told that story. And so this idea of the audience or the environment really matters, particularly because I'm going to say that maybe a great audience to help co-construct stories is working collaboratively with a clinician like a speech language pathologist. So stories come in different shapes and sizes. There are small stories. These are the everyday kinds of stories that you're like, this is what happened in the parking lot, or you are not going to believe this call that I got, right? There, we tell them throughout the day without even thinking about it. In fact, those everyday small stories are one of the things that the literature tells us that people with aphasia and their families, their partners, their spouses, they miss those the most, right? Those are those little things that are throughout the day that sometimes are very challenging to tell, and they don't seem like a big deal, but they really are an integral part of that development of relationship with others, friendships, thinking about how much story is told within friendships. So if we move over more toward the middle of the continuum, I'm going to use this term illness narratives. It's by a fabulous sociologist, Arthur Frank, but it's to me, illness is a little bit of a negative connotation, but it means, centered around this idea of something happened to me health-wise, and it's impacted my life, and I'm going to tell a story about this. And my story is this, and we'll talk in the next slide or two about different types of illness narratives. Illness narratives aren't the biggest type of stories that you can have, but they're certainly bigger stories than those everyday small stories. And then another type of story, and again, this is not all of the types and sizes of stories, but just for our purposes tonight, giving us some ideas, some of those really big, grand life story narratives that we can't ever tell a story that encompasses all of our life, but that we're really telling something that is, a large portion of the amount of time that we've been living. Okay, versus like the illness narrative where I was living with this health condition during this time, this is the focus of my story is the health condition versus the entire range of your life. Okay, so sizes, they also have different functions. Okay, and something I'd like you to think about tonight is that story is just as much about the journey or the process. Okay, the telling of the story, the creating of the story, particularly when someone has aphasia, it's a lot of work to be able to put together all of the events that you might want to share. And so the process of the story is just as magical, maybe even more powerful than the destination or the product. Right. So you've got the putting the story together, the process, taking the journey to get it together and how you're going to share it versus the actual story that you end up sharing. Okay, so those are important because they both have value. And that's where I think too, this idea of finding a partner to be able to help you when you may need some supports on going on that journey. And I think I guess I'll speak for my colleagues here that are speech language pathologists. I believe that in our training, it's becoming a little more evident now, but traditionally we think of story more as product, as speech pathologists. Like we're helping someone have a story that has a beginning, middle, and end, or we're working on grammar, or we're having story cohesion, or there's something about the product of the story versus this journey or process that happens that is this relationship developments. There's lots of small stories that are told during the big story that is developed. So I guess one thing I'd like for us to think about tonight is, what kind of story are you telling yourself? Okay, Dan McAdams, who's right there was right at Northwestern. I haven't looked where he is lately, but he used to have quite a, I think he's still there, quite a big body of work out of Northwestern University. But he talks about there's lots of different types of stories, but he talks about two kinds of stories that I thought were really important for us to be thinking about. And he does work in lots of different areas, but also on like very high performing presidents or high CEOs, or those sorts of things, and takes a look at their life and how they view things. And he talks about this. He says there's a redemptive kind of story, okay, where something bad happens, but the person who's telling it finds good in it. Okay. And so something like, we've got I had a stroke. I have aphasia. I can't work anymore, but I get to spend more time with my grandkids. And boy, is that precious. Okay. These types of stories, McAdams is a psychologist, talks about they foster growth and agency, or feeling like you have autonomy. And they help people that tell redemptive stories are more likely to contribute to society. And that contribution is that, again, have feelings of self-worth and positiveness, okay, versus a contamination story. Okay. And again, there's not every story is one or the other, but just some things to think about. A contamination story is where something good happens, but the person who's telling it finds a negative outcome or a bad outcome. I won the lottery, but now all I do is pay taxes and people ask me for money all the time. Okay. And so those types of stories, typically people who are telling them are less generative. There's anxiety and sometimes depression that can be associated with telling those kinds of stories. Okay, so that's big things to think about. That also means that we have some power to do, some work about how we might frame things. So this, people who believe their lives are meaningful, or that living successfully with aphasia, right, tend to tell stories defined by growth or agency. That sounded like a fun young voice. So redemptive stories are powerful. Contamination stories are powerful. Now there's some types of stories that I'd like you to know about that healthcare providers listen for also. Arthur Frank, which I talked about earlier, talks about some illness narratives. And, these are things that for healthcare providers and clinicians to be listening to. There are three types. There's a restitution type, where I'm going to use the example of having a stroke because I think a lot of us can relate to that on the call tonight. A restitution story is, I had a stroke, I went through rehab for a few months, and now I'm back at work and I'm good as new. Okay, everything's back fine. I'll might even be a little bit better, right? Everything's just fine. So a chaos story is where someone just, they might not even be able to put things in order, that things are just, it's very bleak, things are very dark, and it's difficult to move out of that. I had a stroke, and I cannot move forward. I've lost everything. I can't even tell you what's happening because it's difficult for me to process all of that. And it's hard for me to even see tomorrow. A quest story is where someone is now on a journey. So I've had a stroke, and now I want to go out and educate everybody about stroke awareness. Okay, I'm on a quest to have everyone learn about how they can be healthier and prevent stroke. So I wanted to show a little bit of research from a lab project that we did with Strong Story Lab. There's a lot of words here. I don't mean for you to read all of them. I just want you to get a sense for things. And I might actually ask if, you see, I'll describe the two, and I'll ask you to see if you might be able to tell me some differences you see. So on the left is an example of a chaos word. I should say what we did. Sorry. We analyzed online stories of stroke survivors and categorized them in chaos, quest, and this last slide here, chaos, quest, and illness, or restitution, chaos, and quest. And so what we're showing you are some kind of data that's compiled about what the chaos narratives looked like and what the quest stories looked like. And so what we did is coded the stories and then put them into word clouds to see what words kind of surfaced. So the larger the word, the more people that used that word. Okay. And the smaller the word, there were less instances of that use. So all of the words in this cloud here were words that were from stories that we categorized as chaos stories. And on the right here are words that we categorized from quest narratives or stories. So I'd like you to maybe we could even just take off, if you have, either put it in the chat or just take off your microphone if you see what are some similarities that we see, and what are some differences that we see in the story. So what are some of the similarities that we see? What's the big one? Stroke, right, exactly, stroke. So yeah, so we see that we have stroke in the middle. There's some commonality there. Do we see any differences? Just, a couple, anybody see any differences between this? Remember, the chaos is kind of, I'm that rain cloud, I can't move forward. Things are very difficult versus the quest.
Life in hospital.
Yeah, so we see this life in the quest and this hospital on the right. So we did some, little comparisons here, but you can see that in different stories when they're categorized using those different sorts of techniques, that the words that people are using about a story about their stroke can really be different. In the word cloud, the hospital, the dizziness, headache, brain, pain, medication, back, emergency, versus on the right in the green, brain is bigger, right? In the now, love, family, friends, live, calling. So just some things to think about, that the words that you choose and how you choose to share stories really matters. So I think one thing I'd like us to think about, and then I'm open to taking any questions because we're going to move on to the next section here, is that we can make edits in our story. We can change the stories that we choose to tell ourselves and others, and it can have an impact on how we view ourselves, which can ultimately impact how we view our identity and impact our mental health and well-being. And these even small edits into stories can have a big impact on our life. So let's get into how aphasia impacts story. And I'm going to guess that you all have some that are living with aphasia or have family members that are living with aphasia know this. But I wanted to just, bring it out in the open that, they're having aphasia has been cited as impacting identity. And that it really can kind of be thought of as identity theft. Our friend and colleague, Barbara Shadden, coined that identity theft term with aphasia. It can strike at the core of who we are and disrupt our life. Like we're living our life, we're moving along, and here comes whatever caused the aphasia, the stroke, the head injury, the tumor, and this biographic disruption or this issue with our life. But it also damages the very one tool that we need to navigate story, which is language, right? So the tool that we need to be able to have story is language. And with aphasia, we know that language is challenged. Let's see. Madison, I'm going to hold on to your question and come back to it because it's a little complex. And I think I'm going to move forward and I'll come back and get it. So if stories are how we make sense out of life, connect with our friends, stay in touch with people, process emotions, share about ourselves, right? There's a high stake in storytelling.
Yes.
Yeah, that people with aphasia are really at a disadvantage to telling stories. And this is one of the reasons why stories matter. They help us make meaning. They connect us with people. We process our emotions this way, and we share about ourselves through story. And so one of the things that I've really been interested in when I went back and got my dissertation work for my PhD, and since then, is that I'm really interested in how speech pathologists in particular, but clinicians, can partner with people with aphasia to help them create their stories and have this collaborative partnership where the storyteller brings his or her expertise in life, and the clinician, the speech pathologist, brings their expertise in story, identity, how to organize things, communication techniques and ramps. And together we make a pretty powerful combination. And it's not like I'm the clinician and I'm telling the person with aphasia what to do or vice versa. We're really working collaboratively. But important to note that while we're working together, the story is really owned by the person with aphasia. Oh, so any questions about that or? Okay, so how can stories help us move forward? So I've been really surprised that when I do story work with clients or stakeholders. There are some people on this call that have gone through some story training with our CMU crew. Many times people with aphasia tell me that they've never really taken the time to connect all the dots, to put things together, to think about like what was happening before the stroke and what was happening the day of this. You thought about them all separately. It's not like you haven't, it's not like it's novel information, but taking the time to be very reflective and talking and thinking and taking some time about these concepts, who I was before my stroke and aphasia, what happened, who I am today. And then this really important part is that envisioning the future. What do I want? How do I see myself? What do I want from this? Those are important elements to reflection, and they're opportunities to make meaning and to view experiences differently. So stories target more than language. Guided story work has been identified as a level 1 intervention for supporting mental health issues such as depression in individuals with aphasia. We have this stepped care model from the UK, and there are different levels of models, and they're level 1 interventions that are, we're not talking about pills, we're talking about like, interventions, things like music therapy and support groups and oh boy, there's a list of them. I'm sorry, and it's not coming to me, but story is one of those, that guided story and it's, I believe, that opportunity to really reflect and think on what's happened, what the loss is, and how to move forward and envision the future. And people with aphasia are at higher risk for having mental health challenges or mood challenges, depression, anxiety, because having a stroke puts you at higher risk for this, and then having aphasia, not being able to have the language to navigate these things. And so not everyone who has aphasia has these challenges, but many do. So I wanted to tell you about a project, the dissertation project that I did, and we've been doing this a little bit with some folks on the call here through virtual connections, which I'll talk about here in a moment as well. But I called it the My Story Project. And as I said, if we think back to that first picture where Chris and Nikki were empowering me, and really I was like, what is the magic that is happening between those two? Every time Nikki's telling and retelling her story, it sounds a little different. She seems a little more confident. She seems brighter. And so we created this tool for speech pathologists to be able to partner with their clients with aphasia based on these ideas we've been talking about. Who I was before my stroke and aphasia, my stroke and aphasia, who I am today, and that really important part of my future and my goals. For the My Story project, we worked for an intense period of time, individual sessions for 4 weeks. We've done some modifications and have done some differences where once a week over 12 weeks. I think there's just a lot of variation that needs to be explored there. But I'd like, instead of me telling you what I thought about how the project worked, I'd like to share some reflections from one of the storytellers who went through the My Story project. So there's a lot of words here on the screen. He has aphasia, and the words are the transcript for what he's going to say. So you don't have to look at the words. You can just listen to what he's saying, or if the words are helpful for you, you can follow along. think I'm still, how do I see? I need to get rid of my eraser. Does that work? Okay, there we go.
I was stoked to do it. Yeah, I didn't know choice my words here. We did. Can't wait is great.
Yeah.
You know, I love the whole thing. Just blows my mind. It's an amazing story. No, not the story, just the whole. Not the story. My story is just a story, my life. But the whole thing we did here, it changed my life. I really did. It was amazing.
Amazing. Do you have? So I think this storyteller really gets at that essence of product versus process, right? He says this story, it's amazing. Not the story, my story, it's just a story, but this whole thing we did here, this exploring, this collaboration, this development of relationship to be able to reflect on who I was, what happened to me, who I am today, and where I want to be in the future was very powerful for this individual. Any questions? Okay, so I guess I'd like to finish up with the last two parts of the talk, which I think are really, I would hope be of interest to many of you, but like people are like, where do I start with my story? And you don't have to work with a clinician to tell your story. But I do think we need to recognize that it's not for everybody. So this isn't an intervention that everyone should do. It's not something that someone should be forced to do. It's really something that an invitation, or you're interested, and that both the partner that's supporting the person with aphasia, potentially a speech pathologist, and the storyteller with aphasia are both authentically interested in exploring the story. And there may be times in life when you're not interested in something like this. And you should think also, as you're starting to create your story, about who it is that's going to be the audience, right? Because remember, that audience matters, right? Now, your audience initially will probably be that speech pathologist or whoever the partner is that's sharing and supporting the process with you. But you might think, would I like to create a story to share with family or church, or am I wanting to, does it need to have a certain time limit on it if you're telling it in a certain venue, or are you open to taking as much time as you want? Those are important types of parameters. And I wish we had more time to explore different types or ways to share stories tonight, but I just thought I'd put a few ideas out here for you. We've been talking a lot about sharing stories orally tonight, but stories can be done through writing, poems. Dr. Jerry Hepner is doing some, do we have any poets here tonight on the call that are in that? Bruce is here. Yeah. And Rick Mason. Yeah. So there are some really great ways of telling stories and expressing yourself through poems. Songwriting. We actually took the My Story project. Bruce is raising his hand. Took the My Story project and put it to song. So I invited 3 songwriters with aphasia. They really didn't have songwriting experience prior to that experience. And we invited them to write 3 songs: a song about who I was before my stroke and aphasia, a song about today or my stroke and aphasia, and a song for the future. And that was a very powerful experience as well. People use emojis or bitmojis. I've seen storytelling done through, there are lots of different ways, graphic novels or cartoons, artwork. There are lots of different ways to be able to express yourself through story. A couple of things that you may know about, or maybe you haven't heard of them, but I just wanted to throw a few ideas out there. And again, these will all be in the link. The handouts will have the links in them so that you don't have to take down any of this information. But the National Aphasia Association has been doing a storytelling project. It's a written story. They're short stories told by 3 points of view: people with aphasia, family members or caregivers, these are their words, and professionals, so speech pathologists. I think I've seen some from music therapists. And if you're interested in this, you can read some of their stories online. They have a book that you can download that has stories in it. Or you could actually submit your own story, or you could submit a story with your family member and your clinician if you wanted to do a trio. Anybody here participated in that? Marshall and Boyd, fantastic. And I'm sorry, I'm only seeing one screen right now, so there may be others of you that are doing that too. Another newer sort of collaboration that has evolved, that is not necessarily targeted at people with aphasia, but is this health story collaborative. And it's Annie Brewster and Rachel Zimmerman, and I can't think of his name offhand, but he is one of Dan McAdams' proteges that is interacting with this also. But Annie Brewster is a physician who also has a health experience that significantly impact her life. And so they have a couple of things. She has a book out. I'm not promoting the book, but I'm just sharing that it is available. But there's also on this website, there are storytelling resources. They run some workshops. They have some, I guess they might be, MP4 files of audio stories that can be told or listened to. I was looking at it yesterday, and there was, I saw at least 2 from individuals who had identified as stroke. And I think after listening to one, it was a care partner and a person who had the stroke, and it was pretty evident that she had some challenges in expressing herself as well. So I'm just throwing some ideas out there if you're interested in exploring. Virtual connections for aphasia is, I know there are I see a lot of familiar virtual connections members here on the call. So this is a online platform to meet and interact with other people with aphasia, sponsored by the Aphasia Recovery Connection and Lingraphica. But the reason I'm bringing it up to you tonight is myself and Dr. Bree Beeger, along with 6 students from CMU a semester who were trained in being story coaches, and 6 virtual connections members who had aphasia, entered into a storytelling experience where we helped them to explore that, who I was, who I am, and what does my future look like. And in fact, I see a lot of virtual connections aphasia This Is Our World Club members on the call tonight. I'd like to just share, well, let me ask this, Leora, how strict is the 8 o'clock time or 7 o'clock time?
I think we probably want to wrap up close to the 7 o'clock time. It is dinner time for many people. And then anybody who would like to stay on, for any informal discussion, can certainly do so.
That sounds great.
Yeah, but I'd actually like to add 2 things to the resources, and we'll add this when we send this out tomorrow, is that at our previous aphasia month celebrations, we have often asked people with aphasia to share their perspectives or their stories about themselves and, a story about themselves. And we have videotaped these stories, and they are available on YouTube. And so with the links that we're going to send out tomorrow, we will send the links to some of those stories or perspectives that people have spent time actually working with a speech language pathologist to create the perspectives and their stories. So I just wanted to add that. And then one more thing, you had shared a slide that had different ways of sharing stories. And I just wanted to add the idea of photographs.
Yes.
Several years ago, we had done a class where each week or every 2 weeks, we asked people we gave people cameras and we said, please take pictures that represented your past, take pictures that represent your present, and take pictures that represent your future. And that was another way that people were able, through photographs, to be able to tell their stories. So I just wanted to add that as another way to do it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Well, in the spirit of time, I'm not going to share this video, but I will say that the video clip I had was a storyteller talking about her experience. But what she really was talking about is, again, this process of having dedicated time interacting with, in this case, a student story coach. She talks about the benefits of the process that she went through to get her story, but it made me feel like someone was going to listen to my voice. And so I think there's something, really important about being able to be heard. The Virtual Connections group goes through this process of developing their stories and then sharing their stories publicly in the Virtual Connections community, which is open to anyone who would like to register. And we're actually getting ready to have the next lineup. I think they're deciding on when those presentations are going to be. So if you're interested in hearing some of those stories live, I don't know the dates right now, but if you're interested, you can either check on this Virtual Connections website. They would be called Member Spotlights, or you can reach out to me and I'm happy to let you know when that's available as well. So just, really quickly thinking about what I could do with my story. I think the idea of this, you could develop a story and just share it with a family member, and that would be your goal. And that's fabulous and wonderful. But oftentimes people who go through this process either come in with an idea that they want to share it on a larger platform, or through the process, they decide, I'd really like to be able to go out and share this on a bigger scale. So this idea of the ripple effect and being able to advocate for empowering others who are living with aphasia, who may hear your story, or advocating for just people knowing what aphasia is, and also about what life is like living with aphasia. And so, where you might share your story, really sky's the limit, but oftentimes, areas with family and friends or some sort of community. There are a number of support groups, and it's so much easier these days with Zoom to be able to book a guest speaker. And also campuses are always great places. Medical professional, speech pathology students are great, but also those, if you can get into some other of the allied health disciplines as well. So I appreciate your time tonight. We explored these 5 question sets, and I hope maybe I planted some seeds. Or if you have done some story work before, affirmed what you had done, or given you a few new ideas. So I so appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. If you have any questions, I'm here, I'm fine to stay after a little bit, but also you can reach out to me through email or other social media as well. So, so thank you very, very much for this opportunity. I'm grateful, and, you know, we appreciate you tonight. Thank you.